Hi everyone, welcome to BTC's Bitesize training number 2. And today we're going to be talking about the how, whys and importance of CCQs, which expands to concept checking questions. But throughout the rest of this, you'll be hearing them referred to as CCQs. Okay, so what are they? They're basically questions that are designed to check learners have understood the meaning of a piece of grammar, an item of vocabulary, or a functional expression. The word concept is used to signify the essential meaning of a piece of language. So why do we use them? Basically, it's because they're efficient and effective in checking learners have understood something. They're more effective, for example, than asking learners, do you understand? Which is something that all of us do far too often, I think. And this is basically because learners may think they have understood something correctly, but in reality they haven't. So it's a good method of checking that. And more commonly, especially in groups, is that learners are reluctant in a group setting to admit they don't understand something when everyone else clearly is, maybe stronger than them, maybe understands it. So they'll hide themselves. The other reason is basically they always work. The whole point of them, and you'll see when we show you examples, basically they're very effective in just guiding a student to the answer. It's very clear for you to see if they understand or not because of the nature of the question and because of the simple nature of the answer. And there are some cases where the questions can relate can be dependent on the context, but a simple change of the concept question can change that. And the last thing is to help you yourself develop your own understanding of the language. This isn't necessarily something you need to be a linguist for. It just means that it helps you understand the nature of the language you're trying to teach. So in case of vocabulary, you get to understand why this word isn't used in the same way one of its synonyms is, and you can then therefore explain it to your students in that way. So you have a better understanding of kind of the native level, like why we use this word and not this word kind of thing. And in grammar, it's the same thing, like why would you use this tense rather than another tense? Okay, when do we ask them? So, basically, it's as it says on the slide. They can be used in 2 occasions. The first one is once after the presentation stage of new language to learners. Obviously, if you're doing guided discovery, usually the CCQs are baked into the guided discovery sheet after the reading or the listening or the transcript or whatever you're using for guided discovery. And in this case, you don't necessarily need to ask anything. If you're doing a more traditional presentation of language, then obviously you'll need to ask the group the CCQs, or you'll need to ask specific students CCQs in order to gauge whether they understood you or not from the explanation. The second, and the one I like the most, is as a correction technique. So if someone has said something not necessarily where the meaning is completely understood, you can throw a concept checking question at them to see if they can self-correct. It's so helpful for people to be able to self-correct, because in real life that's what's going to happen. They won't have a teacher next to them, or they won't have their peers next to them who can give them the correct answer. They'll need to kind of think about it, and also allows them to think about the language in a more kind of direct way. So, how many questions should you ask? This is one of those really frustrating points where I can't really give you a specific number. So it depends. But I would say it's best to plan between 1 and 5. In some cases, you won't need them. You won't need that many, I should say, but you will need a good few. But then again, it depends on your students as well. So if you have a particularly strong group, you probably will only need maybe 1, maybe 2, if you need them. If you have a weaker group, maybe you'll need 5, maybe more. But it just depends on the context, it depends on your group, it depends what you're teaching them, all of these things, it all affects it. Okay, so how do we make them? So in order to make CCQs, we need to look at the basic language, we need to create some basic language analysis. So we'll use a nice simple phrase, she used to play piano, that little sentence. And from that, we can make the following statements. Knowing used to, basically, she doesn't play the piano now, she played the piano in the past, and she played piano many times in the past. That's what we know using this language structure. Using those 3 statements, which we have, we can create our questions. So does she play the piano now? No. Did she play the piano in the past? Yes. Did she play once or many times? Many times. So basically, it's just a nice way of you come up with the statements and then you create the questions from those statements. It's not particularly difficult. And it's also really important that you put the answers that you expect the learners to be able to give in brackets. Now, let's look at the answers a little bit. The answers are also binary questions that only have 2 possible answers. So either a positive or negative or a 50-50 option, and that should be the 50-50 option should be baked into the question. So from the example in the last one, did she play once or many times? There's 2 possible answers. It's a 50-50 option. The language used in the question is simpler than which was being checked. This is really important because there's no point using the language being presented in the question because that will just confuse things. It's really important that you simplify it to language that they know and understand. And so when you give them the new thing, they can understand it properly. And if the student is incorrect, then you clarify and you can ask another question after that to the same student to see if they understand. If you need to clarify more, then you have to. Remember, we always go at the student's pace. It's important to be adaptable and to be helpful to them. If it takes them 20 minutes to understand something, it takes them 20 minutes to understand something. We can't expect people to pick it up in 30 seconds. Okay, so sadly, there are lots of rules for design and use of CCQs. The main thing is you just remember them, and whenever you do need to use CCQs, just use them in a realistic way. I'll go through the rules in a second, but first of all, I need to be clear that if you have a one-to-one student, they might not necessarily be the most helpful thing. And if you have a group of upper intermediate students, again, they might not be the most helpful thing. Usually when you explain something to upper intermediates, they should understand it well enough at that point where they can be like, oh no, I know, don't worry. However, this is not always the case, and it's good just to kind of throw one in to just be sure about it. Personally, I use CCQs to check like my one-to-one students' errors. I find it's really helpful for them, and it has I've been proven in their progress that it does work. But at the same time, if you feel like your group will react in a weird way to CCQs, which does happen sometimes with adults because they're adults, they can make up their own minds. It's important to use them in the right time, at the right time and the right in the right way. Don't be strict about it. Be kind of more open, more free about it. Okay. Anyway, so let's have a look at the rules. So first of all, break down the concept of the item into a series of statements of meaning. So, as always, if you need to use a dictionary, it would help. But just make sure that you're using the right definition of it, because there are many definitions of the same word, as you know. Make sure the statements of meaning are expressed in simple language, as I said before in how we make them. Turn the statements into questions. The questions should be short and simple, and I don't think I was clear enough about this. This is really, really key. The question should be really short and really simple. Fifth, the language must be simpler than the language you're checking. Sixth, the question should not normally use the language you are checking. Seven, sort the questions into a logical order. So what do I mean by logical order? I mean, start off with the simplest one first and build up in complexity. And by complexity, I mean kind of more, so for example, does she play piano now? No. Did she play many or once in the past? Many, right? That was the thing. So it's a more complicated question than the first one. Write down the correct answers you expect learners to give. This just helps you be clear. The answers should be short and simple. Again, binary, yes, no, all that kind of stuff. If they answer incorrectly, state the correct answer and provide clarification. If they don't understand it, they haven't understood your presentation. So make sure that you're able to explain it better and don't get stuck in an endless explanation loop where they just get more and more confused. It's not helpful for anyone. So a couple of further examples before we finish. Look at the sentence, can you open the door, please? Is this an order or a request? Request. And am I being polite or impolite? Well, obviously you're being polite. In this case, this is an example of a functional expression. And the last one is, I neglect to water the plants. So do I water the plants? No. Does this happen regularly? Yes. Are the plants cared for? No. So we're highlighting the word neglect here. So CCQs can be used to kind of explain a slightly more advanced piece of vocab if necessary. So again, it's not always the case. Some people might be able to directly translate something, but it's not always the case where people can directly translate something. So be aware of that. In the words, a word may sound familiar, or it might be like, oh, but it's this. But then actually when it's used, they're like, oh, I don't understand it. It should mean this. It's like, no, because it's a separate word in a different language. It doesn't always mean this. So be aware of that. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Please complete the form and send it back to me. It's really good to see all your feedback, and remember to include reflection. Thank you. Goodbye.